From filmmaker John Luessenhop comes the 2013 entry in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise that really began the weirder era of the franchise, and is not only known for being the first chainsaw requel of the series, but a film that also marked the beginning of the last decade's explosion of requel films in general, disregarding every other film in the franchise aside from the 1974 original. Way before Halloween 2018 ever did it with that franchise, the world was introduced to John Luessenhop's Texas Chainsaw. Known as Texas Chainsaw 3D during its initial release, Texas Chainsaw was surfing that dying wave of 3D horror, and let me just say that I am not a fan of 3D movies or watching 3D movies in 3D. I just find it distracting and I don't like the look most of the time. I don't want to have to wear those glasses, and so on and so forth. I'm not a fan. So naturally, when we saw this film in theaters, we grabbed a 2D showing of the film to avoid all of that nonsense, and luckily, the film still looked okay enough as a standard film. I mean, of course, there's the usual handful of wonky looking shots that you can just tell were made for 3D effect, but other than that, it doesn't really take you out of the film. The film itself acts as a direct sequel to the 1974 original, and nixes every other franchise installment from existence besides that first film. Years before Halloween 2018 did this, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise was already in full requel mode. Although names carry over from 1986's Chainsaw 2, such as the Sawyer family namesake, a namesake actually not introduced in the 74 film, there really is nothing else on display within this film besides the aforementioned continuity of the original. No callbacks or homages or anything nodding to the other entries. 3D plays it pretty much straight as the only other film in the series, besides Tobe Hooper's classic, which is a pretty bold move for a movie like this when you think about how revered a film that first sequel was. Sort of similar to Halloween 2018 wiping Halloween 2 out of existence entirely. A bold move indeed. A stupid move on both accounts, because Halloween 2 and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 are scary cinematic gold, but bold nonetheless. It's worth noting that Texas Chainsaw was actually written by Jason Goes to Hell writer-director Adam Marcus, along with his wife, Deborah Sullivan, who crafted a story around the events of the original film, and specifically, what happened directly after Sally's escape, where the Sawyer family must not only deal with the encroaching authorities, but also the frenzied and lynch mob-esque townsfolk of Newt, the town where the story takes place. With that said, I'd like to preemptively point out that in Adam's original script, the movie was to take place in the 90s, 20 years after the events of the original, which would have made perfect sense regarding the age of Heather Miller, as well as Leatherface himself. The producers are really the ones who updated the film and brought it into the contemporary year of 2013, which technically makes it 4 decades after the first film, which absolutely makes no sense within the context of the film. And that's why the actual date of the first film is not explicitly shown, nor are the date of deaths on the tombstones of the Sawyer family members explicitly shown. They're actually covered up by very convenient overgrowth. I think Adam Marcus gets a lot of misdirected hate about these aspects of the film, and while I do think they work against the film and are a flat-out detriment to it as a whole, these things are really not the fault of Adam Marcus or the other writers involved. The producers probably just wanted to have a modern film to appeal to the so-called modern audiences as much as possible, which has always been one of the dumbest things I hear studios and producers say, as if no modern kid is going to not go see a film if it's not set in modern times. If those kind of people actually exist, they're probably not going to pay to go see the movie anyway. So just tell the story you want to tell and stop worrying about having everything be modern. But no. They wanted smartphones and rap music and all that contemporary stuff in this movie. Timeline be damned. Also, when it comes to these two questionable lines,
do your thing, cuz,
and
"Welcome to Texas, motherfucker!"
I think those were lines added in by the producers. And again, not things that were a part of the original script. So take that how you will. I'd also like to point out that this movie filmed in Louisiana this time, not Texas, which is kind of weird, but better than California, and better than Bulgaria, that's for sure. Following the events of the original film, the town sheriff, played by Tom Barry, arrives at the Sawyer house demanding for Leatherface to surrender. The family initially refuses, but eventually comply. The crazed townsfolk of Newt, however, led by a man named Bert Hartman, played by Paul Ray, soon arrive on scene and end up burning down the Sawyer farmhouse in an act of vigilante justice. The arsonists are proclaimed heroes of the community, and the entire Sawyer family is thought to have been killed. However, an infant with a burn mark on her chest is found by one of the townsmen, Gavin Miller, played by David Bourne, who promptly murders her dying mother, Loretta Sawyer, played by Dottie Brow. Gavin and his wife Arlene, played by Sue Rock, take the child into their care and raise her as their own daughter. This was actually a pretty intense opening to the movie, with not only a very stylish recap of the 1974 film playing atop the actual opening credits, but a pretty hardcore and mean-spirited series of events once we catch up to the arrival of the sheriff on site, after Sally's escape. Credit where credit's due, Bill Moseley does an awesome job channeling the spirit of Jim Seadow as Drayton Sawyer, and this really does feel like an organic continuation of the 1974 film. Leatherface, still garbed in his Pretty Woman attire and played by Sam McKenzie, does a pretty good job as a frightened and bewildered psychopath, mourning the loss of his brother, the hitchhiker, whose body lies on the table beside him. If you look closely, you can see the body of the truck driver from the first film as well, alluding to the fact that he did not make it out of the situation alive. Grandpa, looking a bit more alive in this sequence than how he did for the entirety of the first film, is actually played yet again by John Dugan. And how cool is that, huh? The highlight of this cannibal family reunion, however, is the appearance of the late and great Gunnar Hansen himself, this time playing a man named Boss Sawyer, who sort of acts as the quiet patriarch of the family, because it does seem like Drayton takes orders from him and not the other way around. There's also a slew of other Sawyers in this house as well, who must have all come to the house after realizing somebody got away. There's Bear Sawyer, played by David Bell, the aforementioned Loretta Sawyer, and 3 other unnamed Sawyers, who I simply couldn't find the names of, character or actor-wise. But there's 2 men and 1 woman, with one of the men I assume to be the partner of Loretta and the father of baby Edith, who later comes to be known as Heather. Many years later, a grown-up Heather, portrayed by Alexandra Daddario, receives a letter informing her that her grandmother, Verna Sawyer Carson, has passed away, much to her surprise. When she confronts her parents about it, she discovers that she was adopted from a family in Newt, Texas, something she sort of always wondered about, but never knew for sure until this point. Against her adopted parents' wishes, Heather, her boyfriend Ryan, played by Trey Songz, her best friend Nikki, played by Tanya Ramond, and Nikki's boyfriend Kenny, played by Kiram Malaki Sanchez, and I'm probably butchering these names, travel to her grandmother's home to collect her inheritance. Along the way, the group picks up a hitchhiker named Daryl, played by Sean Sipos, who Heather is suspicious of right from the start. But regardless, the team presses on. Upon arriving at the property, Heather is given a letter from Verna's lawyer, Farnsworth, played by Richard Reel, and is explicitly told to read said letter before entering the house, which of course, she neglects to do. As the group explores the house, they decide to stay the night and party it out in celebration. I mean, Heather just inherited a full-blown mansion. What's not to celebrate? The gang decides to head out into town and retrieve food and party supplies, leaving hitchhiker Daryl behind to look after the house. Expectedly, Daryl begins stealing valuables and intends on fleeing the scene before they get back, but instead discovers a mysterious metal door in the wine cellar that he is unable to open. And as he tries to enter, he is killed by an aging Leatherface, now played by Dan Yeager, who does an excellent job in the role and really does seem to channel Gunnar Hansen's performance from the original. While grocery shopping, it's revealed that Nikki and Ryan have been sleeping together, Heather meets Deputy Carl, played by Scott Eastwood, and his father Bert Hartman, who is now the mayor of Newt. Bert tries and fails to buy the house outright from Heather upon learning her namesake, but she refuses, and from this point on it's clear that the mayor is going to be trouble. Heather and her friends return to find the house ransacked, but decide to celebrate regardless after learning that not much has been taken. While Kenny is preparing dinner, he goes downstairs to the cellar, where Leatherface impales him on a hook and drags him back down the stairs. Nicky tricks Ryan into going outside to the barn, seduces him, and the two end up getting it on once again. Meanwhile, Heather finds the decomposing body of her Aunt Verna upstairs, and soon encounters Leatherface in the kitchen thereafter. But after being knocked out by the skin-masked madman and waking up in the basement, she manages to make her escape while he kills Kenny with a chainsaw, cutting the man clean in half. Heather runs to the Carson Sawyer graveyard outside and hides in Verna's coffin, which Leatherface soon saws through. Nicky and Ryan draw the attention of Leatherface, while Heather gets in the van and picks up her friends. Using a chainsaw, Leatherface ends up cutting through one of the tires, which causes the van to crash, killing Ryan on impact. After wounding Nicky, he then chases Heather to a nearby carnival, where Deputy Carl is patrolling the grounds. While at the police department, Heather begins digging through the files of the Sawyer family and learns of the family's murderous history and how they were killed, and the sheriff and Hartman send an officer to investigate the Carson estate. Over the phone, the officer reports his findings. He finds Nicky hiding in a freezer, but accidentally shoots her in the head before he himself is killed by Leatherface. Leatherface skins the flesh from the officer's cadaver and uses it to create a new flesh mask. Enraged by the officer's findings, Hartman vows to end the remaining Sawyers. Heather leaves the station and meets with her lawyer at a bar. He tells her that Leatherface is her cousin, who actually survived the original burning of the Sawyer family farmhouse. Heather escapes the bar when Hartman finds her and runs into Deputy Carl in his patrol car. As they drive away, Carl reveals himself as Bert's son, a fact unknown to Heather up until this point. He kidnaps her, takes her to an old slaughterhouse, ties her up, and gags her. Listening over the deceased officer's police radio, Leatherface learns of Heather's location and goes to the slaughterhouse to kill her. Before he is able to do so, he sees the quote-unquote birthmark on her chest, which is actually a burned impression of the Sawyer family crest that her mother was wearing at the time of her death, and he instead removes her gag. Heather tells him that she is his long-lost cousin, and, shocked and bewildered, he quickly releases her. Leatherface is then attacked from behind by Hartman and his friend Ollie, played by Richie Montgomery. As Hartman and Ollie prepare to kill Leatherface by throwing him into the meat grinder, Heather kills Ollie and tosses Leatherface's chainsaw.
Do your thing, cuz.
In the struggle, the sheriff arrives but hesitates to stop Leatherface from killing Bert. Leatherface uses his chainsaw to force Hartman to his horrible death in the bowels of the meat grinder. The sheriff decides to let Heather and Leatherface go, telling them to clean up the mess. Afterwards, Leatherface and Heather return to the Carson estate, where Heather reads the letter from Verna, played by none other than Marilyn Burns herself. The letter informs her that her real name is Edith Rose Sawyer, that Jedediah, her cousin, aka Leatherface, lives in the basement behind the metal door, and that he will protect her for the rest of his life. But it also requests that she take care of him in return. Also, note that this version of Jedediah is in no way related to the Jedediah of the 2003 film. Leatherface finally buries Verna's body, poetically signaling that he now accepts Heather as the new matriarch of the family and head of the household. Heather accepts how Leatherface's mental state and upbringing drove him to commit his original crimes, and ends up graciously accepting him as her only family. In a post-credits scene, Heather's adopted parents show up at the Carson estate to visit Heather, intending on greedily splitting her assets. As they wait at the front door, Leatherface comes through the door with his chainsaw in hand, presumably killing the two scumbags right there on the spot. All in all, I enjoyed this movie, timeline inconsistencies aside. I thought the story was pretty good, and although nothing will ever beat out the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 as the ultimate sequel to the original, this requel works quite well as a direct follow-up to the original story, if you can divorce yourself from the idea that Chainsaw 2 exists. The cast and crew deserves to be proud of this film, whether or not it's grown better or worse with fans in the years since. The production design did a great job. The special effects, although not as polished or extravagant as some of the other Chainsaws, were all very good. And the cast, specifically Daddario, Yeager, and Ray, were excellent in the film, and they all felt believable. Again, not to keep beating a dead horse, but my biggest problems with this film are the aforementioned timeline issues. This film should have been set in the 90s, not the 2010s, and there should have been no smart technology or modern rap music or anything contemporary of 2013. If they had to set it in modern times, then Daddario's character should have been the daughter of the baby seen in the 1973 flashback, and not the baby herself, therefore getting rid of the character needing to be in her 40s by the time we meet her. It would just instead be her daughter that the story focuses on. But alas, we didn't get that. I can look past these faults though, because those faults aside, the movie is a quick-paced, exposition-filled horror movie that tells its story, fleshes out its main characters, feels like it could be the same world as the 74 film. Also, it was awesome seeing Marilyn Burns, John Dugan, and Gunnar Hansen in this movie. Talk about a Chainsaw reunion. Big props to Bill Moseley as well, who did a great job as Drayton Sawyer, and a big rest in peace to the legends Marilyn Burns and Gunnar Hansen, staples of the original film and horror itself. Rest in peace. I'm just gonna say it. As far as Chainsaw Requels go, this movie does a better job telling a fully fleshed out story than the 2022 film, which in and of itself is a requel to the first film. And while this movie is riddled with those previously mentioned timeline issues, Texas Chainsaw 3D still manages to be the better film overall when it comes to the Battle of the Chainsaw Requels. Joseph Luessenhop's Texas Chainsaw is worthy of a rewatch.